Hello, welcome to Geeking Out with Shad. I am going to bust the most common myths about EVs, and some of them aren't necessarily myths as much as they are way blown out of proportion. So let's talk about those. So let's talk about fire risk first, because this is the one I hear all the time. Oh, EVs catch fire all the time. They'll burn your house down. Don't park them in your garage. Blah 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 blah. Right? The reality is internal combustion engine vehicles and hybrids, which also have internal combustion engines in them, have a much higher risk of catching fire than an EV. And statistically, here are the numbers. It's actually pretty mind-boggling. I didn't even know that there were these many fires with ICE vehicles. So out of 100,000 EVs, 25.1 cars catch fire. So, and to me, that seems like a lot, right? You're like, wow, 25 cars out of 100,000, right? But actually, it's a pretty, minuscule amount. What's shocking here is ICE vehicles, out of 100,000 vehicles, there are 1,529 ICE fires per 100,000 vehicles. Like, that is significantly more fire risk than an EV. Like, by how many times? Like 25 cars versus 1,529 cars, right? And hybrids are even more risky there. 3,474 hybrid vehicles catch fire out of 100,000. That's significant. So before you go talking about how EVs catch fire all the time, maybe you need to know the statistics, because your ICE car is way more likely to catch fire. There is a logical reason for this. You are literally carrying a tank of flammable fluid in your car, and that flammable fluid has to go through gas lines and through a whole system into a scorching hot motor and go through and mix with air, and then literally it drives by a bunch of explosions happening inside the engine. Like, that's how an internal combustion engine works, is with explosions. And so we actually should be pretty surprised there aren't more fires. And if we go back to the earlier days of internal combustion engines, fires were very common. So it makes sense that that is a much more bigger fire risk than an EV. Like, yeah. Let's go on to the next one. So next we'll talk about the child labor issue, because this is one that always comes up. Oh, you like to support child labor anytime you buy an EV. What's interesting is this device that I'm holding in my hand right now, which is my smartphone, is pretty much the cause of how this whole industry started. When it comes to lithium ion batteries, granted, they're also in laptops and things like that, but all of these devices, almost all of them, not all of them, but very close to all of these devices, are made in China. So China is the one that actually went into the Congo to mine for cobalt, which is in all these lithium ion batteries. So they started that. They didn't care about the child labor issues, things like that. And out of the Congo, roughly, I believe it's like 35 to 40% of the cobalt has the potential of being mined from child labor. And there's a few reasons for that. I'm not going to get into those details. I've actually done a video on that already. But the reality is that now that the auto industry is reliant on lithium ion batteries and needs cobalt, they're trying to get away from it. Some of them are. Tesla and Ford and stuff. But they're actually trying to make sure they're sourcing cobalt from non-child labor sources, right? And nobody cared about the child labor issues until EVs came around, which I find kind of interesting. But now all these anti-EV people bring it up all the time, yet they never cared about child labor in pretty much any other industry, you know, until EVs came along, and now they care. So I do find that interesting. So, yeah, that's another big one that they always bring up. And another claim is that they say that EVs are dirtier than internal combustion engine, and they find two things that they say. One, they say the grid is powered by fossil fuels, which isn't true. That's actually becoming less and less. The grid is becoming more and more supported by renewable energy. Yes, even in a state like Texas, which is the oil state, right? And nuclear power and things like that. And then there's some other sources that come from natural gas, which is actually a lot cleaner than coal, believe it or not. And then you have coal, which is the one that's really on the way out. So when you really look at what powers EVs, the interesting thing is EVs do burn cleaner than internal combustion engines when we talk about the tailpipes versus production of electricity. But now there's a whole another thing is producing the EV. The initial environmental causes when an EV is built are quite a bit higher than an ICE vehicle. But because they run so clean once they're made and being used, and ICE vehicles don't run clean at all because they got tailpipe emissions, and they have this entire supply chain of oil for every single tank of gas. So every tank of gas that burns has to start from being drilled out of the ground, transported, refined, transported again to the gas stations, and so on and so forth. So just the production of gas itself is extremely dirty, and then it goes in your car and burns. So you got to account for that too, as a supply chain of gasoline. So once everything's accounted for, it is said somewhere around 25,000 to 30,000 miles of driving an EV, it then offsets the losses from its initial manufacturing. So yeah, they definitely are much better for the environment than internal combustion engines by a lot. And the longer you own your EV, the cleaner they get. And also, the more that the grid is cleaned up, your EV just automatically gets cleaner without you having to do anything, as where an internal combustion engine is always going to burn the same amount of emissions no matter what. 10 years from now, probably gets worse because things on the engine and stuff wear out. So there's that one. That one's pretty funny. So let's bring up this grid thing again because we just talked about it, but a lot of people say the grid's not going to be able to handle it. Well, yes, and this is where it's a myth, mostly because it's not like a switch where all of a sudden today everybody's going to have an EV. And what just happened a few days ago, where we had one of the warmest days on Earth, Texas his grid was getting overwhelmed. And why was it getting overwhelmed? Because of people's air conditioning. Air conditioning, running your air conditioner on hot days in the summer by far strains the grid more than an EV. EVs, you can plug them in overnight. There's lots of different ways to mitigate stressing the grid. I actually do that. Like when it's a really hot day out, I don't plug my EV in the middle of the day. I wait until later in the evening when less power is needed to cool people's homes. And you can totally mitigate that. And there aren't that enough EVs out there yet to stress the grid. Now, as more EVs come online, yes, power companies have to beef up the grid, and they are actually working on that and doing that as we speak. They actually said they really don't have to do that much work. They only need about a 23% improvement of the grid in order to sustain EVs if every single person had an EV. And that's within the next 10 years. But not every single person is going to have an EV for quite a long time. I bet by 2050, you'll probably see a lot of EVs, but it certainly isn't going to be everybody yet. So those are the main four, but there's a couple other ones that I've heard people say. I remember somebody saying, I see them stranded on the side of the road all the time. It is very interesting. I have yet to see an EV stranded. I have seen people post and say, yeah, I was pushing the limits on my charge and they ended up running out of charge. And then they've had to call and get a flatbed or something like that. Yes, if you run out of electricity in your car, just like if you ran out of gas, you can't drive it. But you have very clear indicators on the dashboard that tell you that you're getting low. And every EV I've ever seen, when you get down to, 25% or 20%, it starts warning you and stuff. So if you run out of charge on your EV, it's because you're pushing the limits of what it can do. Just like if you run out of gas on a car and it's running near empty and you're like, oh, I'm going to keep going on it, right? Rather than getting to a gas station. That being said, there aren't as many chargers as there are gas stations and things like that. So if I was to say anything, it would be we need the charging network to get improved, which it is. It's constantly getting improved. So the more chargers, the easier it will be, and to make sure you don't run out of charge. But I recently drove to Colorado and back, and on that whole trip from Minneapolis to Colorado, I saw probably about 10 to 12 vehicles stranded on the side of the road. I don't know the reasons they were. I doubt it was because they ran out of gas. But every single vehicle that I saw stranded on the side of the road was an internal combustion vehicle. I did not see one electric vehicle stranded on the side of the road. Earlier in the spring, I did a road trip with the Volkswagen ID4 down to Bentonville and back. And once again, I did not see a single EV stranded on the side of the road. So when people make those claims, they're just flat out lying. They're flat out making things up. There's no truth in what they're saying. They can't tow far. This is another one. Well, first of all, most EVs will never tow, so that's not an issue. But when we're talking about pickup trucks, now that there's some EV trucks coming online, they absolutely tow great. They do a great job. But yes, they get impacted roughly half, maybe a little less than half of its range when you're towing a pretty significant load. But so do ICE vehicles. ICE vehicles get half or more than half impacted on fuel economy, which is the same as range. So I had a Silverado, and on the highway, if I was around 70 some miles per hour, I could get 23, 24 miles per gallon. When I towed with the Silverado, I got like 10 miles per gallon. That was a 3,000 pound trailer, and the truck is capable of towing 9,000 pounds. So I wasn't even close to the capacity of the truck, and it was getting 10 miles per gallon. So all vehicles get heavily impacted when you're towing larger loads. That's just the truth. Now we go back to what I just said in the previous one. It's the charging infrastructure, the charging network that needs to be improved, and probably charging speeds and things like that. So yeah, if you're road tripping a lot in a pickup truck, let's just say you have a Rivian or a F-150 Lightning, Yeah, I wouldn't road trip towing with a vehicle like that yet. Someday they'll get there, it'll be a lot better situation. But today, yeah, probably not the best thing to do. Now, if you live in a local city or local area and you're towing short distances, let's just say you own a lawn care business, you could easily have an electric pickup truck because you're just going to be doing these short trips to different places and you're not going to go over, 100, 150 miles in a day. So, and then the last one is I've heard people say nobody wants an EV, nobody wants an electric car. Well, actually, there's a lot of people that do want them. So to say nobody wants them is pretty silly. And there's way more people that want them than what you think. They are really nice to drive. They're nice cars. They're actually super convenient, especially if you live in a city and you have a level 2 charger at your house. It is so convenient to have an EV over having an ICE vehicle. So people do want them. They're in really high demand, and many EVs are very difficult to get. It's only been recently, and I think doesn't have anything to do with EVs. It has to do with the cost of them at the moment and the fact that I think we're kind of on an economic downturn at the moment, that some EVs have become available. But up until just recently, it was like almost impossible to get anything. And when you want something that's like more popular, like a Rivian or something, you have to wait a long time. So EVs are in extremely high demand. And sure, market conditions might change that here and there, but it's not because people don't want EVs. It's because the market conditions are changing, and so all vehicles are impacted in those. So there you have it. I get it though. There are people out there that just they grew up on internal combustion engine. And if you're a car enthusiast and you've wrenched on cars and you race them or monkeyed around with them or you like classic cars, I understand that you don't like to see this change. But it's interesting because none of that stuff is going away anytime soon. Like last I checked, they're still making the Hellcat or whatever, right? Sure, they plan on replacing it with an EV, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be plenty of fun, cool internal combustion engine vehicles around for a very long time. I mean, we're probably talking 20, 30 years. You're going to still be able to enjoy your hobby. There'll be a whole new generation of people coming on, born and getting into driving cars and stuff that aren't into that hobby and they're not interested in it. So that's fine. They'll grow up with EVs and they'll be into EVs and think that's cool, right? So I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see anything wrong with people liking their internal combustion engines. But I don't see why that means you have to be anti-EV and be an EV hater and live in fear that you're not going to be able to enjoy your hobby. You've got such a long time before you have to be concerned about that. And by the time that comes, you're going to be old, and there's going to be a whole new younger generation of people that didn't grow up with the cars that you grew up with, and they aren't going to care. There might be a small slice of them that care, but most of them are not. I mean, heck, when I go look at all the influencers out there, including Jay Leno, even he's talking up EVs, right? So it's like, just knock it off and enjoy what you like and stop like trying to trash on EVs all the time like they're going to come in and invade your space or something. It's pretty ridiculous. So there you have it. I appreciate your support for my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.